Hello there, and welcome to the intermediate guide for Europa Universalis IV. My name is Ludiet Historia. I make videos for Europa Universalis IV, and this is the second video in the collaborative series of guides with Paradox Interactive, where we will explain in depth mechanics of the game and how to best use them to your advantage. We will be using all the DLCs in this video, and you might have noticed we have some new buttons on the screen, the random new world and custom nation buttons. Random New World will generate a completely new Americas that can be quite flavorful and change the way you play your game out. If we go to our options, we can choose how rare or frequent a Random New World nations can be. So let's set this to frequent and see what the New World has to offer by creating a randomized New World. Make sure to also have your Terra Incognita set to no so as to see what the New World looks like before you start your game, in case you like to play as one of the Random New World fantasy nations yourself. This has to be one of the more interesting random new worlds I've seen, and yes, you can in fact get all achievements if you play an Iron Man game with any of the new world nations, including fantasy ones such as Vinland in our case, a Norse nation with high American technology group in the new North American continent. In this video, we'll be cycling through some nations that are both great for beginners and intermediate players, but also present their own unique starting challenges and mechanics that you will learn to master. Before we play as a random new world nation, it's best we start as Portugal, one of the most versatile nations that can become both a strong military power in Europe and a great colonial empire. That's right, true Livonia, Portugal is coming for you. In order to unlock the ability to colonize, we first need to reach Administrative Technology level 5, which will allow us to select our first idea group. Of course, we will be selecting the exploration ideas, which will unlock new mechanics as we progress through the ideas in this idea group. Quests for the New World idea allow us to hire explorers and conquistadors, which we can use to explore uncharted waters and lands. Colonial ventures will unlock our first colonist, which we can use to colonize uncolonized provinces in the New World as well as parts of the Old World. We do need to select a native policy beforehand, ranging from coexistence, which prevents natives from rising up and fighting against our colonists in that province, to repression policy, which speeds up the process at which we gain the colony, but it also means we will have to fight the natives depending on how aggressive they are. The Portuguese actually start with an explorer from the beginning of the campaign, Diogo Gomes. So what we could do is separate 3 of our light ships, assign Diogo Gomes in charge of that fleet, and then we can start exploring the coast of Africa from the beginning of the campaign. We also can create a flagship, and we have some unique Portuguese traits, including fleet exploration range plus 1.25, naval barrage cost minus 40%, and trade power per ship and fleet plus 2. Thus, we can create a very unique light ship as our Portuguese flagship. So if we assign this flagship to the fleet, which is commanded by Diego Gomez, it increases our exploration range, meaning we can even start exploring the North Atlantic coastline. As you progressively explore new areas, you can assign your fleet with Diego Gomez, the explorer, to continue to explore newer areas adjacent to the ones that you've already explored. Thus, we can reach the New World within the first few years, way before we even unlocked our exploration ideas, which is why, in my opinion, Portugal is the best and easiest nation to start a colonial empire and your very first colonization gameplay. If you're not the colonizing type and want a proper Central European experience, the Holy Roman Empire is where most people learn to hone their diplomatic skills. Austria starts as the Holy Roman Emperor, which offers them unique actions such as the ability to bestow imperial grace at the cost of 1 imperial authority. They can also invite nations to the empire, revoke electorates after the religious war has also been settled. If we go to the HRE map mode, we can see see the electors shown in the orange color. Blue is for the free cities, and purple, of course, for the emperor. The provinces that have a yellow or orange overlay are officially part of the HRE but temporarily under control of a non-HRE member, such as the lands in Burgundy, Venice, Holstein, and the Teutonic Order. If you have the Emperor DLC, you will have access to the improved HRE screen, and you have two paths you can go down: the centralization and decentralization paths. By centralizing, you can eventually integrate all nations into yourself and become the Holy Roman Empire nation. By decentralizing, you end up with a perpetual massive swarm of nations to help you conquer the world should you wish to. Both paths are fun and offer unique playstyles, so I do recommend you try out both. If you're not sure which, it's best to do one at a time in separate playthroughs. Each reform you enact gives modifiers to both members of the HRE as well as the Emperor. The first lowers the construction and development costs for every province that is a part of the HRE, as well as it gives a casus belli on nations that hold HRE provinces like Burgundy, Venice, and the Danes. You fulfill reforms by getting at least 50 imperial authority and having enough members approve of the reform you're trying to pass. This is done by improving relations with member states and by having high diplomatic reputation. At the start of the campaign, Catholic is the dominant faith and the Emperor can only be Catholic, but after the religious wars, that can change. If the Protestants win the war, or if neither side wins, then you can end up with religious peace, where basically any religion is accepted. There are also imperial incidents that can happen, such as the Shadow Kingdom or the Teutonic Order wanting to join the HRE. Members get to vote on which option they prefer in the incident, but ultimately the Emperor decides the outcome and can either gain or lose imperial authority based on whether he chooses what the majority of the nations want or not. In our case, if we abandon Italy, then we gain 8.6 imperial authority, but we still lose 20 imperial authority from having abandoned Italy, whilst if we decide to rein them in, we will lose a little bit of imperial authority, as that is not the option most member states have chosen to go with. Now that we're clear on how exactly the HRE works, let's talk about Austria itself. They have a unique mission tree that comes with the DLC and in turn has divergent paths. You can choose to go down the Legacy of Charlemagne branch, which is focused on the Holy Roman Empire and gives various bonuses to help out rein in the empire, or you can choose the German unification path, which will allow you to more easily unify the entirety of Germany with the mission Unify Germany, removing the administrative technology requirement to form the German nation. Some of the missions can also influence the imperial incidents or be influenced by the actions you take during the incidents. This is unique to the Austrians, as they are for all intent and purposes destined to be the HRE Emperor. A good emperor does know his diplomacy, and that is one absolutely vital thing in Europa Universalis IV. Knowing how to use your diplomats and set your diplomacy both at the start of the campaign and as you progress makes the difference between a beginner and an advanced player. If you press B on your keyboard or you hit the production interface at the top left of the screen and then go to diplomacy tab, you will see what diplomatic actions you can undertake. This is only available if you have the Mandate of Heaven DLC. In the first tab, you can automatically assign your diplomats to improve relations with various nations. One of the most underrated mechanics in the game is having diplomats always active, and improving relations with other nations can really help with lowering your aggressive expansion faster, allowing you to more quickly expand or help get more potential allies. You can also click on any of the diplomatic actions and more easily see which country would approve or disapprove of whatever action you like to undertake, since it tells you the exact number, as well as it turns the country green or red on the map itself, green being a yes and red being a no. I especially love using the screen for diplomatically vassalizing nations. Click offer vassalization and then I get an idea of which nations already would become my vassal diplomatically, such as Braganza in our case. I just need to fulfill the prerequisites, namely have them as an ally and get 190 relations. After after which we can offer vassalization. This way, if I want to say vassalized Trent, how close am I to being able to do so, and if I could with the current diplomatic actions at my disposal. Despite the value being at minus 13 now, if I secure an alliance with them, improve their trust of me, or improve my diplomatic reputation, I should be able to offer them vassalization. There are also special actions we can undertake as emperor aside from bestowing imperial grace, such as the ability to revoke the free city status if one of the free cities upset us, or grant it if we need to make more free cities in order to preserve our gain of imperial authority. Having 12 free cities in the empire increases our imperial authority by 0.06 every month. Having less or none will of course end up giving less or negative imperial authority. The papal controller also has unique diplomatic abilities, such as the ability to call for a crusade, excommunicate nations that have bad relations with the papal states, or even appoint cardinals in exchange for ducats. Great powers also have unique abilities that allow them to take on the foreign debt of nations, and in exchange will give us relations with that nations, and similarly we can influence nations, giving again 25 relations, increasing our opinion with the targeted nation by 25, and it will cost a minimum of 16 ducats, but this can be more expensive depending on the size of the nation and their particular economic output. So now that we know a bit about how to properly use the diplomatic screen, what should we look for when we decide who to ally and who to attack? One very important thing is to get allies whose lands you have no interest in for now, and who you can maybe ally to fight a common enemy situated between your lands or in close proximity to where your lands will be in the nearby future. If you're a bigger nation like Austria, you won't need as many allies but more subjects, so leaving your diplomatic relation slots open for future subjects and personal unions is vital. If you're able to diplomatically vassalize a nation, that would be the best course of action, as it would mean that you get no aggressive expansion from expanding your domain, but at the same time, if the country is too small and has a different religion or culture from everybody else around it, it might just be best to annex it through warfare than using up your precious diplo relation slots. Subjects in Europa Universalis IV can be an amazing way to grow your borders without incurring the penalty of overextension and having to deal with different cultures and religions. There's a few different types of subjects. There's vassals, there's personal unions, tributaries as the three main groups, but we also have special ones such as the daimyos for Japan, incorporated personal unions as is the case here with the Austrians, there's appanages for the French, and so on. Take note, you do require specific DLCs for getting these special types of subjects. The difference for the main groups of vassals is that tributaries such as Jiangsu do have a certain degree of autonomy. They can declare their own wars, they have their own diplomacy, but they do need to pay a yearly tribute to their overlord, whereas vassals and personal unions belong to the overlord, and as such they have to join on the side of the overlord's wars. They don't have a say on whether they like to join or not. It is up to the overlord whether they would like to enable scutage, which prevents the subject from joining on their war in the case of vassals, whilst personal unions will always be joining on the side of their overlord. They also pay a percentage of their income to the overlord and cannot declare their own wars, have their own alliances, but they can ask other nations to support their independence if they want to break free, which turns into an alliance when the independence war has begun. As an overlord, you can use subject interactions to get income from your subjects by siphoning, which in turn costs liberty, desire, and relations with your subjects. You can block them from developing their provinces, even seize lands and divert trade from vassals. Integrating your subjects is different based on the type of subject too. Personal unions can only be integrated after 50 years have passed, with some exceptions, and vassals can be integrated integrated after 10 years. You need to have at least 190 relations to begin integrating them, and the speed at which they get integrated depends on your diplomatic relations, whether you have the same religion, are a part of the same culture group, and so on. The pronoyers and some other subjects are different, however, you can also integrate them as soon as their leader passes away. Suffice that you've retracted the right to inheritance for your pronoyers, meaning that, for example here, when Erard Le Terrier has passed away, his kingdom of Provence will be fully annexed by Byzantium without having to spend a single of the 1,505 diplomatic power. Subjects are also a great way of keeping your governing capacity in check, as going over it can incur some serious penalties, especially the increase in aggressive expansion that we take if we are over our governing capacity. If you want to increase your governing capacity, you can do so from privileges. The land rights privilege gives 100 governing capacity for each of the estates once granted, but it does cost 5% crownlands. Whilst most European nations only have the 3 estates, it can be possible to grab more estates, such as the Cossacks in the case of the Eastern Europeans, and you can even have up to 5 estates as the Indian nations, meaning you can end up getting 500 extra governing capacity from 5 estates privileges. Do take note, in order to get the Cossacks estate as well as the various Indian estates, you do need to have the right DLC, for the Cossacks itself being the Cossacks DLC, and for the Indian estates it is the Dharma DLC. You can get more governing capacity from specific missions. Your government rank also influences how much governing capacity you have, plus from technology and even ideas can increase the amount of governing capacity that you have, alongside even monuments. It can either increase by a flat amount of governing capacity or by a percentage amount. And of course, you can also spend reform progress to gain governing capacity. Moving on to Asia, we have some unique mechanics added with the Mandate of Heaven DLC. Historically, the Mandate of Heaven is what gave legitimacy to whoever ruled China. In our current start date, that is Ming. As the mandate holder, you need to ensure your mandate is always high. A low mandate leads to disaster and in most cases complete collapse of your nation, whilst a high mandate can be used to pass reforms that strengthen your rule and nation. There's 2 values to keep into account: meritocracy, which is used to enact decrees that last 10 years and cost 20 meritocracy, and then there is the mandate itself, which can be used to enact celestial reforms. Each reform costs 70 mandate and 1 stability, so make sure you're at 100 mandate and above 2 stability when enacting reforms, as well as make sure you have a strong army, economy, and no big enemies that could attack you, as you will be extremely weak once you've passed a celestial reform. When you are below 50 mandate, your units are extremely weak. They take extra fire and shock damage, and your manpower pool and economy see a massive decrease up to -50%. Having low mandate can also trigger disasters such as the crisis of the Ming dynasty that is available after the first age has passed, and even a civil war. Mandate can be gained from having positive stability, a big amount of tributaries, the Forbidden City monument in your capital, as well as having prosperity in your provinces will also contribute to getting mandate faster. Some of the celestial reforms have unique new mechanics that they unlock, like the ability to turn your tributaries into direct vassals from elevate tributary status reform, which also increases how much mandate you gain. Playing as Ming might be one of the most fun experiences, as it really is a fine balance that you need to maintain that can lead to an extremely powerful nation, but can also lead to complete disaster if you don't manage your nation properly. If you've played E4 for about 500 hours or so, you'll notice that there's a massive world outside of Europe and East Asia. That's right, you can actually play as those nations in the Americas, Africa, and Central Asia. Let's take, for example, Mutapa, which is more or less positioned where modern-day Zimbabwe is. Mutapa is a tribal nation, which means they have their own unique government reform, with the 6th government reform allowing them to become either a kingdom, a a republic, a theocracy, or become a horde. The tribal government is our way of showing how various nations around the world had their own journey towards aligning themselves with a more standard type of government in existence, leading towards their modernization and economic prosperity in Europa Universalis IV. Playing as Mutapa comes with its own challenges. You start without feudalism, the very first institution, which means that until you've embraced this institution, you will pay 50% more power to increase your technology level, which also starts at level 2, one level behind your neighbors in Kilwa. Institutions are the game's way of simulating how historically certain parts of the world might have gained a technological advantage over others, and it is a unique mechanic that gives different modifiers with each passing institution you embrace, as well as it allows you to keep on par with the rest of the world if you've embraced your institutions. There's a few ways to catch up if you're playing as Mutapa. The easiest way would be to just conquer Kilwa's provinces, since they already have embraced feudalism. If we don't have enough feudalism in our provinces, we could wait for it to spread to our lands. As long as the provinces are adjacent to another province that already has embraced that particular institution, it should be spreading there. Institutions spawn in provinces that fulfill the prerequisites, but you can bring an institution to your land too if you develop your lands. So we can bring feudalism in the province of Sena by developing the province of Sena. The more we develop, the more we bring feudalism. Once it reaches 100% and it is fully present in this province, it will start spreading to adjacent provinces too. This is a great way of bringing Renaissance, colonialism, and other institutions that likely will spawn in Europe or in Asia. Instead of waiting for the institution to slowly spread to your lands, you can just spawn it by developing one province until it actually gets that particular institution. One type of nation that players get into very late is hordes. Be honest and let me know in the comment section how many hours you roughly had when you first properly started playing as a horde. We'd love to know your stories on how those games went as well. Hordes are some of the strongest nations in the game at the start for a number of reasons and are designed with one thing in mind: conquest. What makes hordes so powerful is their ability to raise provinces after they've conquered them, which means they get administrative, diplomatic, and military power for each development that they raise alongside ducats and horde unity. This also lowers the cost of coring these provinces up. That means that as a horde, you can expand significantly faster than regular nations and use the admin power that you gain from raising the province to core the very same province. Aside from raising, hordes also have the strongest cavalry units at the start of the campaign, boasting 2 offensive shock and 1 defensive shock for the Eastern Swarm Cavalry, and they also have access to the Tribal Conquest Casus Belli or the Tribal Feud Casus Belli, both of which only cost 75% aggressive expansion, allowing them to expand at a much faster rate than normal nations. By contrast, most nations would need to unlock the Religious War Casus Belli from finishing religious ideas or more advanced late game CBs to only get 75% aggressive expansion when conquering provinces. Regardless of whether you're playing in Asia, Europe, or Africa, you need to know how autonomy works. This one modifier has led to many players completely abandoning their runs because their economy was going down the drain, their manpower pool was collapsing, and they didn't even know why. Autonomy lowers how much you get out of a province. To put it straight, more autonomy means less manpower, less income, less force limit, and sailors that you get out of that provinces. So ideally, you want to have close to 0 autonomy in all of your provinces as soon as possible. If you are at peace, by default, you get minus 0.1 autonomy, but seeing as you're likely going to be at war for most of your times, you need to make sure you find other ways of lowering autonomy. Of course, you can and should manually lower autonomy after you've conquered new provinces, and whenever you have the ability to lower autonomy in provinces that have high autonomy in general, you should do it. At the very start of the campaign, you really want to optimize the privileges given to the the estates, and for that matter, it's in most cases great to give out the +1 mana privilege for all 3 of the estates, which means that you inevitably end up with only 5% crownlands, and as such, you gain a monthly autonomy change of 0.2 in your provinces. It can also be a little bit misleading the other modifiers, as maximum absolutism -30 doesn't really affect you until the 1600 when absolutism is an actual mechanic. Liberty desire from subject development really is not as bad as it would seem, and the national tax modifier is offset by the extra tax that you get from your clergy, meaning that realistically the only debuff here is the +0.2 autonomy increase. So even if you are at peace, you're still gaining 0.1 autonomy every month, so you need to make sure that after 5 years you're going to be seizing crownlands as well. But aside from that, you also can get more crownlands for your estate by seizing provinces from your enemies. Every province you conquer will give you more crownlands, and the lower your influence when you're conquering provinces, the more crownlands you get. Aside from increasing your crownlands to 20% to offset the autonomy debuff, there's not much you can do early in the campaign, but once you have reached 20% and you're not getting too much autonomy, your provinces should be around 15 or less autonomy, in which case you can just lower the autonomy at that point. Earlier in the video, we talked about idea groups. In Europa Universalis IV, idea groups are how you build your nation's unique style. You can be a massive empire that just keeps expanding, a small nation that has an economy bigger than a larger empire, or even a crusading state bent on spreading your religion, all with the help of your idea groups. There's 3 categories of ideas: administrative, diplomatic, and military, and each will give various modifiers and even abilities pertaining to that power group. It costs by default 400 power to unlock each idea in an idea group, but this can be lowered or increased based on a variety of modifiers such as leader traits, monuments. Depending on what type of game you want to have for your nation, it's best to go for very specific ideas. For example, if you plan to have a lot of subjects, such as Spain has here or Ming and Austria will, you want idea groups that help with keeping your subjects in order and with integrating them faster or getting more benefits out of having subjects. Influence, diplomatic ideas, and admin ideas are all great for a subject-rich nation like Spain. Diplomatic ideas gives extra diplomats that help increase relations or integrating more subjects at the same time, and even diplomatic relations to allow you to have more subjects at the same time. Influence flat out reduces the integration cost by 25%, as well as it lowers the liberty desire of subjects. It also increases how many subjects you can have without penalties, and again, diplomatic reputation. Mix this in with administrative ideas, which also lowers the core creation cost by 25%, lowers the autonomy change by 0.05, and increases your governing capacity by 20%. The policy between influence and administrative ideas, namely Vassal Integration Act, also makes it 15% cheaper to annex your subjects. If we go to our country modifiers, as Spain right now, we're integrating our subjects 80% cheaper than you normally would by stacking modifiers. 10% from the Papal Legate, which is available because we are a part of the Catholic faith and it is an interaction with the Holy See. Integrated Elites and Vassal Integration Act are both from our idea group and from the policy. Another 5% from the Nobility Integration Policy privilege, and the last 25% from the unique mission available to the Spanish and the Castilians if you have the Domination DLC. We could also increase this by another 10%, meaning we would integrate subjects 90% cheaper. All we would have to do for that is get the quality ideas, and then the policy between influence and quality lowers the cost by another 10%, meaning integrating massive subjects such as Bohemia in our case only takes 6 years. Trade nations like Florence can go for plutocratic ideas that offer a mix of military and economic ideas itself, but choosing trade ideas as their second group gives them access to the trade contour network policy, which offers an extra merchant and makes regiments 10% cheaper by mixing in trade ideas with plutocratic. That means you get an extra 4 merchants from 2 idea groups and policy that you can afterwards use to filter in more trade in the Genoa node without having to get trade companies or colonists to get more merchants, and it's easily doable in the first few years of the campaign, no matter how big your empire is. Then as your third idea said, you can also go for a more militaristic idea like quantity, which also helps you build an army, but it gives 15% goods produced modifier from the trade quantity idea policy, meaning you not only grow your economy more, but you also have a massive army significantly bigger than nations your size normally have. I strongly recommend pausing the game and taking a good look over all the policies available from mixing various ideas to get a better grasp on the game and to figure out what kind of nation you want to be building. If you've learned something from this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as up next we're gonna go into the more advanced guide for Europa Universalis IV for all of you that finished the 1444 hours tutorial.